July 16th, 1212. Spain is about to be decided in one place you can barely see on a map. Not in a throne room, not in a cathedral, in a mountain pass so narrow that 3 men can't walk side by side. And right now, at this exact moment, an entire Christian army is staring up at a wall of rock that might as well be the gates of hell. The Sierra Morena mountains, a natural fortress, steep, brutal, unforgiving, the kind of terrain that swallows armies whole and spits out bones. And on the other side, an empire waiting to crush them. This is the story of how one night, one guide, and one impossible gamble changed the fate of Spain forever. This is the story of how geography became destiny, and how a single pass cracked an empire in a single day. But to understand why this moment matters, we need to go back. Back to the shame. Back to the defeat that still burns in the mind of every man standing at the base of those mountains. 1195. Alarcos. King Alfonso VIII of Castile learned a lesson in blood that year. A lesson about overconfidence, about underestimating your enemy, about what happens when you march your army into a fight you're not ready for. The Almohads, the North African dynasty that controlled southern Spain, crushed him. Absolutely obliterated his forces. It wasn't close. It wasn't honorable. It was a massacre. Alfonso barely escaped with his life. His knights, slaughtered. His banners, trampled into the mud. His kingdom, left exposed, humiliated, and on the defensive for nearly 2 decades, 17 years. That's how long Alfonso carried that defeat. That's how long he woke up every morning knowing that somewhere across the border, the Almohad Caliph, Muhammad al-Nasir, was laughing at him. But Alfonso didn't forget. He couldn't. Because this wasn't just about pride. This was about survival. Here's the thing about medieval Spain that most people don't understand. It wasn't one war. It wasn't Christians versus Muslims in some neat, clean battle line. It was chaos, shifting alliances, Christian kingdoms fighting each other, Muslim kingdoms fighting each other, mercenaries switching sides for gold, truces that lasted until someone saw an opportunity. But by 1212, something had changed. The Almohads weren't just another rival kingdom, they were an empire, a massive, disciplined, terrifyingly efficient war machine that stretched from Morocco to Valencia. They had money, they had soldiers, they had momentum, and they were pushing north. Every year, another fortress fell. Every year, the Christian kingdoms lost ground. Every year, it became clearer. If something didn't change, southern Spain would belong to the Almohads forever. And after southern Spain, central Spain. And after that, the whole peninsula. So Alfonso did something desperate, something he'd never done before. He asked for help. 12 of 12. Spring. Pope Innocent III proclaims a crusade, not in the Holy Land, not in Constantinople, right here, in Spain. And for once, Europe listens. Knights pour in from France, from Germany, from Italy, fighters who'd heard stories about the Reconquista, the centuries-long struggle to take Spain back from Muslim rule, and wanted a piece of the glory. But here's the problem with crusaders from outside Spain. They don't understand the rules. In Spain, war is complicated. You fight your enemies in summer. You negotiate in winter. You respect truces. You ransom prisoners. You don't burn everything to the ground just because you can. The Northern Crusaders? They didn't care about any of that. They arrived in Toledo, Alfonso's staging ground, and immediately started causing problems. Looting, burning villages, attacking Jews and Muslims indiscriminately, even the ones living peacefully under Christian rule. Alfonso was furious. This wasn't a crusade. This was a mob. But he needed them. Because even with these undisciplined hotheads, his army still wasn't big enough to face the Almohads alone. So he swallowed his pride and turned to the two men he trusted least in the world, Peter II of Aragon, Sancho VII of Navarre, rivals, competitors, men who'd fought against Alfonso in the past, men who had their own ambitions, their own grudges, their own reasons to let Castile burn. But they came. Why? Because they understood something the Northern Crusaders didn't. If Castile fell, they were next. This wasn't about religion. It wasn't about glory. It was about survival. If the Almohads broke through Castile, Aragon and Navarre would stand alone. And they wouldn't last a year. So, in the early summer of 1212, three rival kings who barely trusted each other formed an alliance. A fragile, temporary, deeply uncomfortable alliance. They called it a coalition. History would call it a miracle. The army assembled in Toledo, thousands of men, knights in heavy armor, foot soldiers with spears and shields, archers, engineers, supply wagons stretching for miles. It was the largest Christian army Spain had seen in a generation. And it was already falling apart, because the Northern Crusaders, the ones who'd come from France and Germany expecting an easy war against infidels, were getting impatient. They wanted to fight. Now. Immediately. They didn't care about strategy or logistics, or the fact that marching an army across Spain in the middle of summer was a death sentence if you didn't plan carefully. They especially didn't care about Alfonso's insistence on treating Muslim civilians humanely. "We came here to kill Muslims," they said, "not protect them." Alfonso tried to hold the line. This was his campaign, his war. And he knew that if they turned this into a slaughter, every Muslim kingdom in Spain would unite against them, and the coalition would be doomed. But the Northern Crusaders didn't listen. So Alfonso made a choice, a brutal, necessary choice. He let them leave, thousands of them, maybe a third of his army, just gone, marching back north, grumbling about weak Spanish kings and wasted opportunities. The coalition shrank, visibly, dramatically. And across the border, Muhammad al-Nasir heard about it and smiled. Because here's what al-Nasir knew. He didn't need to beat the Christians in open battle, not yet. All he had to do was wait. Let the heat do the work. Let the supply lines stretch. Let the coalition march south, deeper into Almohad territory, farther from reinforcements. And then, when they were exhausted and desperate, he'd crush them at the one place they couldn't avoid. The Sierra Morena mountains, a wall of rock separating central Spain from the rich, fertile south. Andalusia, the heartland of Almohad power. There were only a few passes through those mountains, narrow, steep, easy to defend, and al-Nasir controlled every single one. So when Alfonso's army left Toledo and marched south, al-Nasir didn't panic. He didn't rush to meet them. He just positioned his forces at the key passes and waited. Because he knew something Alfonso was about to learn the hard way. You can have the best army in the world, the bravest knights, the sharpest swords. But if you can't cross the mountains, none of it matters. Late June 1212, the march south. At first, it feels like victory. The coalition army sweeps through the border fortresses like a storm. Castles that had held out for years suddenly fall in days. Malagon, Calatrava, Alarcos, yes, that Alarcos, the site of Alfonso's greatest shame, surrenders without a fight. The soldiers are riding high, singing, joking. This is what they came for. This is what crusade is supposed to feel like. But Alfonso knows better. Because with every mile south, the heat gets worse. The roads get narrower. The supply wagons start falling behind. And the men, these brave, confident, mortal men, start to realize that Spain in July is not like France in July. This isn't war. This is survival. The sun doesn't just beat down. It hammers. Relentless. Inescapable. Men in full armor are collapsing before they even see combat. Horses are dying. Water becomes more valuable than gold. And the worst part? They're not even fighting yet. The real enemy is still waiting, somewhere ahead, beyond the mountains. But first, they have to reach the mountains. Early July. The coalition enters Almohad territory. The landscape changes. Fewer towns, fewer wells. The roads, if you can call them roads, become dust trails that lead into emptiness. Scouts report back. Enemy patrols spotted. Nothing major, just enough to know they're being watched. Alfonso orders the army to tighten up. Stay in formation. No looting. No breaking ranks. They're deep in enemy land now, and one ambush could shatter the entire campaign. But morale is cracking. See the northern crusaders who stayed? They're starting to regret it. They signed up for a glorious war against infidels. Instead, they're trudging through a desert, drinking warm water, eating stale bread, and watching their friends collapse from heat stroke. This isn't what the Pope promised. This isn't what the song said crusade would be. And then, just when things can't get worse, Peter of Aragon and Alfonso have a fight. Not a little disagreement, a screaming match in front of the entire command tent. The details don't matter. Maybe it's about strategy. Maybe it's about who gets credit when they win. Maybe it's just two exhausted, terrified kings realizing they've bet everything on a plan that's falling apart. What matters is this. The coalition isn't united. It's three rival armies pretending to be one. And the cracks are showing. Sancho of Navarre plays peacemaker. Surprising, considering he's usually the hot-headed one. And the kings agree to keep marching. But everyone knows the truth now. If this army breaks, it won't be the Almohads who destroyed it. It'll be itself. July 10th, 1212. The Sierra Morena comes into view. Imagine standing at the edge of the world and staring up at a wall that shouldn't exist. That's what the Sierra Morena looks like to the coalition soldiers. Not a mountain range, a barrier. Steep, jagged, hostile. The kind of terrain that makes you wonder if God put it there specifically to stop armies from crossing. And somewhere on the other side, Muhammad al-Nasir, with an army that outnumbers them, on ground he controls, waiting. The scouts fan out, searching for a way through. There are passes, technically. But here's the problem. Every single one is narrow, defensible, a bottleneck. The kind of place where a small force can hold off a much larger one for days, maybe weeks. And al-Nasir knows this. He's positioned his forces at the main crossing, the one the coalition has to use if they want to reach the plains beyond. The scouts come back with bad news. Enemy tents near the pass, thousands of them. They're dug in, watching every approach. Alfonso stares at the map. Peter stares at the map. Sancho stares at the map. There's no good option. If they attack the pass head-on, they'll be slaughtered. The Almohads have the high ground. They have the numbers. They have time. If they try a different pass, they'll lose days, maybe weeks, searching for one that isn't guarded. And every day they waste is another day their supplies dwindle. Another day their soldiers lose faith. If they turn back, the campaign is over. Alfonso's credibility is destroyed. The Almohads win without fighting a single battle. So they sit there, at the base of the mountains, staring up at an impossible problem. And that's when someone says the sentence that changes everything. There might be another way. The voice belongs to a local. A shepherd, some chronicles say. A knight who knows the region, others claim. The popular tradition names him Martin al-Haja, though whether that's a real name or a title or a legend invented later, no one really knows. What matters is this. He says he knows a pass the Almohads aren't guarding. Alfonso looks at him, then at Peter, then at Sancho. Show me on the map. The guide points to a route that barely exists. It's not on any official path. It's steep, narrow, dangerous, the kind of trail shepherds use when they're moving goats, not armies. Can we get the whole army through? Alfonso asks. The guide hesitates. If you move at night, if you stay quiet, if you're willing to risk everything on one throw of the dice. Silence. Because everyone in that tent knows what this means. If the guide is wrong, or worse, if he's a spy sent by al-Nasir to lead them into a trap, the entire coalition will be destroyed, caught in the mountains, slaughtered in a place so remote their bodies might never be found. But if he's right, if this ghost of a trail actually exists, and if they can move fast enough, and if the Almohads really haven't stationed anyone there, then they can slip through, undetected, and hit al-Nasir's army from a direction he never expected. It's insane. It's impossible. It's the only chance they have. July 13th, 12:12. Night. The order goes out. Pack light, move silent, no fires. The coalition army begins the most dangerous march of the entire campaign. Not toward the enemy, not into battle, just up, into the dark, into the unknown. The pass, if you can call it that, is barely wide enough for 2 horses side by side. The ground is loose rock and dust. One misstep and you're tumbling down a cliff you can't even see in the dark. The soldiers move in near total silence. No talking, no coughing. Hands over the mouths of horses to keep them from neighing. Because if the Almohads hear them, if even one scout spots the torches or hears the clank of armor, it's over. They'll be trapped, pinned in the mountains, cut off from retreat, and al-Nasir's forces will descend on them like wolves on wounded deer. So they move like ghosts. Hours pass. The night stretches on. Men stumble, horses falter, but they keep going. Because there's no turning back now. They're committed. And somewhere ahead, in the dark, is either salvation or annihilation. Alfonso rides near the front. He doesn't have to. Kings don't usually risk themselves like this. But he needs to see it. Needs to know that this insane gamble is real. Beside him, Peter of Aragon is silent. For once, the rivalry doesn't matter. The politics don't matter. All that matters is the next step, and the one after that. Behind them, thousands of men follow. Not because they believe in the plan, not because they trust the guide, but because they have no other choice. The pass rises, steeper, narrower. At some points, the army has to go single file, winding through cuts in the rock that feel more like caves than roads. And then, just when it feels like they've been climbing forever, the terrain levels out. The guide stops, points ahead. Through the pre-dawn darkness, Alfonso can just barely make out the shape of the land opening up, widening, flattening. They're through. The entire Christian army, tens of thousands of men, has just crossed a mountain range in the dead of night without the enemy knowing. And now, as the first light of dawn begins to break over the Sierra Morena, Alfonso looks down at the plains below, and he sees them, the Almohad camp, tents, thousands of them, spread out across the valley like a city made of canvas, banners fluttering, campfires still burning from the night before. An army that thought it was safe, an army that positioned itself to guard the main pass, because that's the only route anyone would be crazy enough to use, an army that has no idea the enemy is already behind them. Alfonso feels something he hasn't felt in 17 years. Not confidence, not certainty, but possibility. For the first time since Alarcos, he believes they can win. July 14th, 12:12. Dawn. The sun rises over the Sierra Morena, and Muhammad al-Nasir wakes up to the impossible. His scouts come running, breathless, terrified. The Christians, they're here! Al-Nasir doesn't understand. What do you mean, here? They're at the pass. No, my lord. They're through. On this side. In the valley. That's not possible. The main pass is guarded. There's no way an entire army could break through without a fight, without... How? The scout shakes his head. We don't know. And that's when al-Nasir realizes he's been outmaneuvered. The Christians didn't smash through his defenses. They went around them, through some trail he didn't even know existed. His entire strategy was built on geography. Let the mountains do the work. Force the Christians into a bottleneck. But now, the bottleneck is gone. The Christians are on open ground, where cavalry can charge, where the coalition's heavy knights can do what they do best. Al-Nasir has two choices: retreat or fight. He chooses to fight, because retreating would shatter morale, make him look weak. But he's rattled. His commanders are rattled. And the Christians? They've had hours to rest, to prepare. For the first time in this campaign, the momentum has shifted. July 16th, 1212, the plain of Las Navas de Tolosa. 2 days of maneuvering, and now they're face to face. The Christian coalition on one side, the Almohad Empire on the other. Everything, 17 years of shame, months of marching, one desperate night crossing, comes down to the next few hours. Alfonso looks across the field, thousands of soldiers, and at the center, protected by elite guards, the Caliph's red banner. If they can reach that banner, the battle is won. But between Alfonso and that banner, an ocean of steel. The formations line up. Alfonso commands the center. Peter of Aragon takes the left. Sancho of Navarre holds the right. The morning is already brutal, the kind of heat that turns armor into an oven. Priests move through the Christian ranks. Imams do the same on the Almohad side. Everyone knows not all of them will see sunset. The charge begins. The Christian cavalry thunders forward, heavy knights on war horses, lances lowered, a living avalanche. Almohad archers release. Thousands of arrows darken the sky. Horses scream and fall, but the knights keep coming. The impact is deafening. Lances shatter. Swords clash. Men scream. And for a moment, it looks like the Christians might punch through. But then Almohad reserves flood in. Fresh troops. Surrounding isolated knights. The charge stalls. The lines grind against each other, neither side giving ground. Hours pass, not minutes. Hours. The sun climbs. The heat becomes unbearable. Alfonso is trying to hold his forces together, but the Almohad center is holding. The Caliph's guards are like a wall, and if they don't break that wall soon, the Christians are going to lose, because human bodies have limits, and they're reaching theirs. Then Sancho of Navarre sees something. A gap. The Caliph's bodyguard has shifted. Just slightly. They're isolated, cut off by the chaos of battle. If someone can reach them, fast enough before the Almohads realize what's happening. Sancho doesn't hesitate. He gathers his best knights and points at the red banner. We're going through. The charge is brutal. Not a wide cavalry attack. A spear, a narrow thrust of armored knights hammering forward. Almohad soldiers try to stop them. They die. Because Sancho's knights aren't trying to fight the whole army. They're trying to reach one target. The gap closes behind them. They're surrounded now. Cut off. But they're close. The Caliph's bodyguard forms a final wall, and Sancho's knights hit them like a battering ram. What happens next becomes legend. Did Sancho personally break through? Did his sword cut the chains holding the Caliph's tent, as stories say? The chronicles disagree. But here's what's not in dispute. The Caliph's position is breached. The red banner is reached. And the moment Almohad soldiers see Christian knights in the Caliph's camp, something breaks. Not the line, not the formation. Belief. Because if the Caliph isn't safe, then nowhere is safe. If the elite guard can be broken, then anyone can be broken. And when belief shatters, armies don't retreat. They collapse. The Almohad line disintegrates, not slowly, not in organized retreat, in panic. Soldiers throw down their weapons, turn, run. The cavalry that was supposed to protect the flanks? Gone. The reserves that were supposed to plug gaps? Fleeing. It's not a battle anymore. It's a rout. And the Christians, exhausted, bloodied, barely able to stand, suddenly realize they've won. They actually won. Al-Nasir escapes. Barely. His personal guard gets him out before Sancho's knights reach him. But his army? Shattered. Thousands dead. Thousands more captured or scattered across the countryside. The Almohad Empire, the superpower that controlled half of Spain, just broke. In one afternoon, on one battlefield, because of one mountain pass they didn't guard. By nightfall, the plain of Las Navas de Tolosa is silent. The Christian soldiers collapse where they stand. Too exhausted to celebrate. Too stunned to process what just happened. Alfonso walks through the camp. He's 57 years old. He's been fighting this war his entire adult life. And today, finally, he won. Not just a battle. The war itself just tilted. Because everyone knows. After this, the Almohads will never recover. July 17th, 1212, the day after. The battlefield is a graveyard. Thousands of bodies. Almohad soldiers who believed they were invincible. Christian knights who thought they might not survive the day. The living move through the dead, searching for friends, for brothers, for anyone they recognize. Some are weeping, some are silent, some are still in shock, unable to process that they're alive when so many aren't. Alfonso stands at the edge of the field and looks south, toward Andalusia, toward the rich cities that have been out of reach for generations, toward a future that yesterday seemed impossible. The road is open now, not just the physical road, the possibility. The Almohads held southern Spain through reputation, through the belief that they were unbeatable. That belief died yesterday, and everyone knows it. But here's what most people don't understand about Las Navas de Tolosa. It wasn't the end of the Reconquista. It was the beginning of the end. Because empires don't collapse in a single day. They crack, they fracture, they bleed out slowly over years and decades. And that's exactly what happens to the Almohads. Within months, the cracks start showing. Governors in distant provinces stop sending taxes. Local commanders start making their own decisions. Rival factions within the empire start fighting each other for control. Al-Nasir returns to Morocco, humiliated, broken, and dies 2 years later. Some say from illness, some say from shame. His successors try to hold the empire together. They fail. Because once an empire loses its aura of invincibility, it can't get it back. Every defeat becomes proof of weakness. Every rebellion becomes contagious. And the Christian kingdoms? They smell blood. 1230, Badajoz falls to Leon. 1236, Córdoba, the jewel of Islamic Spain, one of the greatest cities in the medieval world, surrenders to Castile. 1248, Seville, the last major Almohad stronghold in Spain, falls after a brutal siege. One by one, the great cities of Andalusia, cities that had been Muslim for 500 years, become Christian. Not because of massive battles, not because of overwhelming force, but because after Las Navas de Tolosa, everyone knew the outcome was inevitable. The Almohads couldn't stop it. They couldn't even slow it down. By 1269, the Almohad Caliphate, the empire that once stretched from Morocco to Valencia, no longer exists, collapsed, splintered, erased from the map. And it all traces back to one night, one pass, one gamble that shouldn't have worked. But let's zoom out even further, because Las Navas de Tolosa doesn't just change Spain, it changes Europe. Before 1212, the Reconquista was a sideshow, a local conflict that most of Europe ignored. After 1212, it becomes a model. The idea that you can unite fractious kingdoms, rivals who hate each other, against a common enemy and actually win? That becomes a template. The idea that geography matters more than numbers? That intelligence and maneuver can beat raw power? That becomes doctrine. European commanders study Las Navas de Tolosa for centuries. They learn the lesson: control the terrain, control the battle. And that mountain pass, that narrow, forgotten trail that barely appears on maps, becomes one of the most famous pieces of ground in military history. There's one more kingdom we need to talk about. Granada. In 1238, a brilliant leader named Muhammad ibn al-Ahmar carves out a small emirate in the mountains of southern Spain. It's all that's left, the last Muslim kingdom in Iberia, and it survives, improbably, impossibly, for another 254 years. How? By being smart. By paying tribute to Castile when necessary. By playing Christian kingdoms against each other. By building fortresses in terrain so difficult that sieges become suicide missions. The Alhambra, one of the most beautiful palaces ever built, rises in Granada during these centuries. A monument to survival, to adaptation, to the idea that even a small kingdom can endure if it's clever enough. But everyone knows it's temporary, because after Las Navas de Tolosa, the trajectory is set. The Christian kingdoms will keep expanding, keep absorbing territory, keep pushing south, and eventually there will be nowhere left to retreat to. January 2nd, 1492, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, rulers of a unified Spain, accept the surrender of Granada. Boabdil, the last Muslim king in Spain, hands over the keys to the Alhambra and rides into exile. The Reconquista, the 780-year struggle to retake Iberia from Muslim rule, is finally over. And when historians trace the turning point, the moment when Christian victory became inevitable, they point to 1212, to a mountain pass, to a night march, to a guide who knew a trail the enemy didn't guard. So here's the final question. What if the guide had been wrong? What if the pass had been guarded? What if Alfonso had chosen to retreat instead of gamble? Then Las Navas de Tolosa never happens. The Almohads hold southern Spain. The Christian kingdoms stay fragmented, weak, on the defensive. Spain as we know it, unified, Catholic, about to launch the age of exploration, doesn't exist. Columbus never gets funding for his voyage. The conquest of the Americas is delayed by centuries, or happens under completely different circumstances. The entire trajectory of Western history pivots on one decision. One night. One pass. That's not exaggeration. That's not hyperbole. That's just what happens when geography meets desperation meets luck. So let's come back to where we started. July 16th, 1212, a mountain pass you can barely see on a map. No grand castle, no famous city. Just rock and dust and a trail that shepherds use. And yet that's where Spain's future is decided. Not by the biggest army, not by the richest kingdom, not by divine intervention or manifest destiny, by information. One man knew something the Almohads didn't. One guide knew a route that wasn't on any map. One piece of local knowledge that turned an impossible situation into a winnable one. That's the lesson empires forget. That's the lesson armies keep learning the hard way. You can have all the soldiers in the world, all the gold, all the God-given confidence that you're destined to win. But if your enemy controls the terrain, if they know something you don't, none of it matters. Think about the great military disasters of history. Thermopylae. The Persians had 1 million men. The Greeks had 300 Spartans and a narrow pass. Teutoburg Forest. Rome had legions. The Germanic tribes had trees and mud and intimate knowledge of ground the Romans didn't understand. Agincourt. The French had knights and numbers. The English had longbows and a muddy field that turned cavalry into target practice. Over and over the same pattern. Terrain matters more than strength. And the side that understands the terrain, that respects it, that uses it, wins. Las Navas de Tolosa is just one more example, but it's a perfect one, because the Almohads didn't lose because they were weak. They lost because they assumed the mountains would do their work for them. They guarded the obvious routes, the main passes, the ones any commander would use. But they didn't guard the impossible one, the route no sane general would take. And that's exactly the route Alfonso chose. Here's the other lesson. Desperation makes you creative. If the coalition had options, they never would have tried the night crossing. Too risky. Too insane. But they didn't have options. They had one choice: gamble everything or go home in disgrace. So they gambled. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the desperate gamble works. Not because God favors the desperate, not because the universe rewards bravery, but because desperation makes you try things your enemy doesn't expect. It makes you break the rules. Take risks that, on paper, look suicidal. And occasionally, those risks pay off. The coalition could have died in those mountains. One Almohad patrol in the wrong place. One lookout who happened to glance the wrong direction. One knight whose horse stumbled and sent rocks tumbling down the slope. Any of those things happens, and the whole plan collapses. The Almohads hear them coming. They move forces to block the pass. The coalition is trapped, caught in terrain where they can't maneuver, can't retreat, can't fight effectively. It would have been a massacre, a disaster so complete that the Reconquista might have stalled for another generation. But none of that happened. The guide was right. The pass was unguarded. The army made it through in silence. And when the sun rose, the impossible had become real. That's what makes Las Navas de Tolosa so compelling. It's not a story about destiny. It's a story about chance. One decision, one gamble, one night where everything could have gone wrong and didn't. And because of that, an empire fell. A peninsula changed hands. A future that seemed locked became open. Empires rise and fall on moments like this, on decisions made in the dark, on gambles that shouldn't work but do. And years later, when historians write about it, they make it sound inevitable, like it was always going to happen this way. But the people who lived it? They knew the truth. It was never inevitable. It was never certain. It was a knife's edge, a coin flip, a single mountain pass that could have been the end of everything, or the beginning of something new. So here's the final thought. When you look at a map of Spain today, unified, powerful, the launching point for an empire that once spanned the globe, it's easy to forget how fragile it all was, how close it came to being completely different. If the Almohads had won at Las Navas de Tolosa, southern Spain might still be Muslim today. The Reconquista might have failed. The age of exploration might have been launched by Islamic powers instead of Christian ones. The entire modern world might look unrecognizable. But they didn't win. Because one guide knew one trail. Because one king was desperate enough to trust him. Because one army was brave enough, or crazy enough, to march through darkness on ground they couldn't see. And because of that, everything changed. July 16th, 1212. Spain was decided in one place you can barely see on a map. Not in a throne room, not in a cathedral, in a mountain pass, in the dark, by men who didn't know if they'd see sunrise, one single pass, one narrow path through rock. And when morning came, an empire realized the door they thought was locked had been opened from the inside. Not by force, not by numbers, by knowledge, by desperation. By one impossible gamble that somehow, miraculously, worked. That's how empires fall, not with a bang, but with a footstep in the dark. Not with a throne conquered, but with a map redrawn. Not with destiny, but with chance. And that's how a single pass changed the fate of Spain, and set up the battle that cracked an empire in a single day. The mountains remember. The pass is still there. You can hike it if you know where to look. It's not impressive, not grand, just rock and dust and a trail that winds through terrain most people would never notice. But 812 years ago, that trail was the most important piece of ground in Europe, and the men who crossed it, exhausted, terrified, unsure if they'd survive the night, changed the world. Not because they were heroes, not because they were destined for greatness, but because when faced with an impossible choice, they chose to move forward, into the dark, through the mountains, toward a future they couldn't see but refused to surrender. And sometimes that's all it takes. One pass, one night, one decision, and history pivots.